All right, let's go. Number 10. Doggerland, the drowned world beneath the North Sea. In 1931, the crew of the fishing trawler Colinda was dragging its nets through the Leman and Ower Banks of the North Sea, 25 miles off the English coast, when something heavy snagged in the rigging. When they hauled it aboard, they found a block of peat. Embedded inside, it was a barbed antler harpoon, hand-carved, approximately 8 inches long. Radiocarbon dating would later place its age at over 10,000 years. The weapon had not been lost from a boat. It had been used on land, on a forest floor, by a hunter who lived where there was now 120 feet of cold saltwater above his head. That single artifact began to unravel one of the most extraordinary discoveries in European prehistory. An entire continent-sized landmass had existed beneath the North Sea within the memory of modern human civilization. The landmass is called Doggerland, and its existence is no longer theory. Bathymetric scans, seismic imaging, and decades of fishing trawler recoveries have confirmed that between Britain and mainland Europe, a vast territory stretched across what is now open ocean. It connected the east coast of England to Denmark, the Netherlands, and Germany in a single continuous landscape. At its maximum extent, Doggerland covered an area larger than the United Kingdom. Rivers ran through it. Forests grew on it. Mammoth, aurochs, and red deer migrated across its plains, and people lived there. But here's where the conventional timeline begins to fracture. The maps that first suggested something strange was hidden beneath the North Sea were not drawn by modern oceanographers. They appeared in medieval Portolan charts and in reconstructions based on far older Greek and Roman sources. Some researchers have pointed to sections of ancient maps that show land masses or large islands in locations precisely corresponding to the known outline of submerged Doggerland. Maps produced centuries before any modern survey could have revealed what was down there. The official narrative holds that these were errors or mythical additions, but the coincidence of shape and position is, for some of these charts, uncomfortably exact. What makes Doggerland uniquely unsettling is not just its existence, but its end. The landmass did not sink slowly over millions of years. It was destroyed within the span of a few human generations. As the last ice age ended and glaciers retreated, sea levels rose rapidly. Rivers that had drained a vast European plain became estuaries. Estuaries became inlets. Inlets became open sea. Then, around 6,200 BC, something far worse happened. A massive underwater landslide off the coast of Norway, known today as the Storegga Slide, displaced a volume of seabed large enough to generate a tsunami. The wave struck what remained of Doggerland at heights exceeding 80 feet, inundating the final lowland territories in hours. The people living there had names, languages, and burial practices we will never recover. Their tools, weapons, and human remains continue to surface in fishing nets and dredging operations to this day. Archaeologists have recovered decorated bone fragments, flint blades, and even a preserved piece of a human skull from the seabed. These are not the remnants of a myth. They are the drowned belongings of a civilization erased within the memory of our species. Somewhere beneath 120 feet of North Sea water, entire settlements still wait, preserved in cold darkness, having witnessed an apocalypse that our ancestors survived and then forgot. Number 9. Beringia, the vanished subcontinent that populated the Americas. In 1937, Swedish botanist Eric Holton introduced a term that would quietly rewrite the story of human migration. He called it Beringia. At the time, most geographers treated the region simply as a land bridge, a narrow neck of territory that had connected Siberia and Alaska during the last ice age. Holton's work, and the research that followed over the next 8 decades, proved something far more dramatic. Beringia was not a bridge. It was a subcontinent. At its full extent, it covered an area of approximately 1.6 million square kilometers, larger than modern Alaska and Yukon combined, and it existed as dry, habitable land for more than 20,000 years. The landmass extended from the Lena River in eastern Siberia to the Mackenzie River in Canada, forming a continuous grassland steppe ecosystem known as the Mammoth Steppe. It supported herds of woolly mammoth, steppe bison, musk ox, woolly rhinoceros, and caribou in densities that rivaled the Serengeti of modern Africa. And it supported humans. Genetic evidence now confirms that a founding population lived in central Beringia for at least 10,000 years in near total isolation, developing the distinct genetic signatures found today across every indigenous population of the Americas. An entire branch of humanity evolved on a continent that no longer exists. What makes Beringia particularly disturbing is what the prehistoric maps suggest we may have forgotten about its scale. Several 16th and 17th century maps, drawn long before Bering's 1728 voyage officially confirmed the strait separating the continents, depict a landmass in that exact region. The Mercator projection of 1569 shows territory in the far northern Pacific that conforms strangely to the footprint of submerged Beringia. Some researchers have argued that cartographic traditions passed down through generations preserved partial knowledge of a northern landmass long after it vanished beneath the sea. The mainstream view treats these as speculative extrapolations or geographical guesses, but the persistence of the shape across multiple independent map traditions is difficult to dismiss entirely. The end of Beringia was not catastrophic in the sense that Doggerland's was. It was slower, more grinding, more total. As the last ice age ended, roughly 12,000 years ago, rising seas began to flood the low-lying plains. The Bering and Chukchi seas crept inward from opposite directions, year by year, century by century. Rivers became estuaries. Estuaries became open ocean. The Mammoth Steppe ecosystem collapsed. The megafauna went extinct across North America within a few thousand years of the flooding. And the human populations that had lived on Beringia itself either migrated south into what would become the Americas, migrated back into Siberia, or drowned with the land. The subcontinent is gone. Beneath the shallow seas between Siberia and Alaska lie the preserved remains of an entire biome that sustained one of the most important human populations in our species' history. Mammoth tusks continue to wash up on Arctic beaches. Stone tools surface from seabed dredging. Genetic studies of modern indigenous Americans carry the signatures of a 10,000-year isolation on a continent that drowned. Every Native American alive today is descended from people who lived on a landmass that no longer appears on any map, who watched the sea rise year after year, who understood that their world was ending. Number 8. Mauritia, the billion-year-old fragment beneath the Indian Ocean. In 2013, a team of geologists led by Trond Torsvik of the University of Oslo published findings in the journal Nature Geoscience that seemed to violate everything known about the age and structure of the Indian Ocean. The team had been analyzing beach sands from the island of Mauritius, a young volcanic island that emerged above the sea approximately 8 million years ago. Within those sands, they identified zircon crystals. Zircons are nearly indestructible mineral grains that preserve their formation date with extraordinary precision. The zircons in the Mauritian sand were dated to between 660 million and 1.97 billion years old. The volcanic rock they were found in was less than 9 million years old. The numbers did not match. They could not match, unless something ancient lay buried beneath the young volcanic island. Further seismic studies confirmed what the zircons implied. A continental fragment, now officially named Mauritia, lies beneath the Indian Ocean, between Madagascar and India. It is a splinter of ancient crust, a piece of a continent that broke apart more than 80 million years ago during the fragmentation of Gondwana. Mauritia is not a mythical lost land. It is a confirmed geological structure, mapped, measured, and accepted as fact by the international scientific community. What makes Mauritia unsettling is what it reveals about the instability of the continents themselves. The surface of our planet is not the stable, permanent geography presented in school atlases. It is a slow-motion wreck of crustal fragments, rising, drowning, colliding, and splintering across timescales that dwarf the entire history of human civilization. Mauritia was once part of a larger continent that connected India, Madagascar, and other fragments now scattered across the southern hemisphere. When that continent broke apart, most of Mauritia drowned. A small piece survived long enough for its ancient zircons to be incorporated into a young volcanic island that formed on top of its submerged bones. The implications extend into cartographic history. A handful of medieval and early modern maps depict landmasses in the western Indian Ocean that correspond loosely to the position of submerged Mauritia. The mainstream interpretation treats these as mythical islands, cartographic decorations, or misidentifications of Madagascar. But the shapes and positions have attracted attention from researchers examining the persistence of geographic memory in ancient charting traditions. Whether or not any human culture preserved knowledge of Mauritia's surface when it was still exposed, the continent itself is real. It is down there, its ancient rock pressed beneath 3,000 meters of seawater and layers of young volcanic sediment. The truly disturbing aspect of Mauritia is not its existence. It is what its existence proves. The oceans are hiding continents, not metaphorical lost lands of legend, but actual crustal fragments with zircon crystals older than most of the rock on Earth's current surface. Mauritia is confirmed. How many others have not yet been detected? How many submerged continental fragments lie beneath the Atlantic, the Pacific, the Southern Ocean, waiting for the right survey, the right zircon analysis, the right accidental discovery to reveal them? The map of Earth's continents that we believe to be complete is not complete. It is a surface impression of a planet whose true geological biography remains largely underwater. Number 7. Greater Adria, the continent buried beneath southern Europe. In September 2019, geologist Douwe van Hinsbergen of Utrecht University published the results of a 10-year investigation in the journal Gondwana Research. His team had spent a decade reconstructing the tectonic history of the Mediterranean region using computer models, rock chemistry, and structural geology. What they reconstructed was not a small fragment, not a microcontinent, not a sunken island. It was an entire landmass the size of Greenland. They named it Greater Adria, and it had been sitting beneath southern Europe the entire time, crushed and folded into the underside of the continent after colliding with it approximately 100 million years ago. The scale of the discovery reframed the geological history of an entire continent. Greater Adria had once been an independent landmass that broke off from the supercontinent Gondwana approximately 240 million years ago. It drifted north, a landmass roughly the size of Greenland, covered at various times by shallow seas and exposed terrain. Then, about 100 to 120 million years ago, it slammed into what would become Europe. The collision drove most of Greater Adria downward into Earth's mantle, subducted beneath the European plate. What remained on the surface was scraped off and crumpled into the mountain ranges we see today. The Alps, the Apennines, the Dinarides, large portions of Greece and Turkey. These are not independent geological formations. They are the scraped-off skin of a dead continent. What makes Greater Adria uniquely unsettling is the realization that the ground beneath entire modern civilizations is built from the corpse of a vanished landmass. The limestone of Italy, the marble that built Rome and Athens, the Dolomite peaks of the Alps. All of it is recycled material from Greater Adria's former surface. Every ruin, every cathedral, every monument carved from southern European stone is carved from the remains of a continent that no human ever saw, that no prehistoric map could depict, because it was already destroyed before our species evolved. Yet here is where the story intersects with older cartographic traditions in ways mainstream geology rarely discusses. A number of ancient Greek and Roman geographical accounts describe lands and territories in the central and eastern Mediterranean that do not correspond to any known modern coastline. These are traditionally dismissed as errors, literary inventions, or confused descriptions. Some researchers working outside mainstream geology have proposed that fragmentary oral traditions may preserve memory of Mediterranean geography from deep prehistory, when glacial sea levels exposed more land than is visible today. Whether or not Greater Adria's final buried surface ever saw human habitation before being crushed, the broader principle stands. The Mediterranean is a graveyard of continents. The ground beneath it is not what it appears. The implications extend beyond geology into something closer to philosophical dread. We treat continents as permanent features of the planet. They are not. Greater Adria existed for 140 million years as an independent landmass, drifted across thousands of kilometers of ocean, and was then destroyed, subducted, and recycled into a different continent within a time frame that, on geological terms, was remarkably fast. The same fate awaits other landmasses currently above sea level. Africa is already being torn apart along the East African Rift. The Indian subcontinent continues to grind into Asia, driving the Himalayas upward while its southern edge is consumed. The continents we inhabit are temporary. Greater Adria is what happens to continents when they lose. Number 6. Hyperborea. The Arctic continent on Mercator's 1569 map. In 1569, Flemish cartographer Gerardus Mercator published the map that would revolutionize global navigation. It was the first map to present the world on the projection that now bears his name, and it became the foundation of modern cartography. But in the far north of that map, in the region that should have shown only open Arctic Ocean, or an empty white void of unknown territory, Mercator drew something else. He drew a continent. It consisted of 4 large landmasses arranged around a central polar sea, with a massive black mountain rising from the very center of the pole. He labeled this region with the name that Greek writers had used for it more than 2,000 years earlier: Hyperborea. The inclusion was not casual. Mercator wrote in his personal correspondence that he had derived the Arctic landmasses from older sources, specifically citing a lost text called the Inventio Fortunata, a 14th century account of Arctic exploration that itself claimed to draw on older Greek geographical traditions. The Greek references to Hyperborea stretch back to Hesiod and Pindar, writers of the 8th and 5th centuries BC, who described a northern land beyond the north wind where the sun never set in summer, where a people lived in harmony, and where the climate was temperate despite the latitude. These were not treated as myth by the writers themselves. They were treated as geographical fact passed down from earlier sources. What makes Hyperborea particularly unsettling is not that it appears on Mercator's map. It is the specificity of the geographical claim. Mercator's Hyperborea shows 4 land masses separated by 4 rivers flowing inward toward a central polar sea, around a black magnetic mountain labeled Rupes Nigra. Modern submarine and satellite bathymetry of the Arctic Ocean has revealed that the sea floor beneath the ice does contain structural features, including the Lomonosov Ridge, which runs across the Arctic Basin from Siberia toward Greenland, and the Gackle Ridge, which runs parallel to it. The Arctic seabed is divided, in rough terms, by underwater ridges that partition the ocean floor into distinct basins. The correspondence to Mercator's 4-part structure is approximate, not exact, but the persistence of a divided polar structure in both ancient cartographic tradition and modern bathymetry has attracted significant attention from researchers. The implications are difficult to resolve within the conventional timeline. Mercator could not have surveyed the Arctic seabed. No one in the 16th century could have. Yet the structural logic of his map, 4 landmasses around a central polar region, corresponds loosely to features that would only be mapped in full after the invention of submarine sonar in the 20th century. The mainstream interpretation holds that the correspondence is coincidental, that Mercator was working from legendary traditions and extrapolating geography that happened to resemble the actual seafloor by chance. Some researchers have proposed alternative explanations, ranging from inherited prehistoric knowledge from ice-free periods when Arctic land may have been exposed, to coincidental legends that happen to preserve structural geographic truths. The truly disturbing aspect of Hyperborea is the depth of the tradition. Greek writers of the 5th century BC already treated Hyperborea as ancient knowledge, drawing on traditions they described as passed down from earlier sources. The chain of references extends backward through Hecataeus, through Aristeas of Proconnesus in the 7th century BC, and into oral traditions that predate written Greek history altogether. Whatever Hyperborea was, whether a real landmass exposed during a warmer climate epoch, a persistent misunderstanding of Arctic geography, or the cultural memory of something older, the tradition is remarkably stable across more than 2,000 years of human writing. The Arctic may have once looked different. Mercator seemed to think so. The Greeks seemed to think so. And the bathymetric structure of the modern Arctic seafloor preserves enough hint of divided topography that the question cannot be dismissed as easily as mainstream geography would prefer. Number 5. Kumari Kandam, the drowned Tamil motherland. In the Tamil Sangam literature, a body of poetry and prose compiled between roughly 300 BC and 300 AD, there are repeated references to a vast southern landmass that once extended from the southern tip of India deep into the Indian Ocean. The texts describe it as the homeland of Tamil civilization itself, a continent where the first 3 Sangam academies were established, where kings ruled for thousands of years, and where an entire culture flourished long before the historical period of recorded Tamil dynasties. The name given to this territory in later traditions is Kumari Kandam. And according to the literature, it was swallowed by the sea in a series of catastrophic floods. The Tamil accounts are remarkably specific. They describe rivers that ran through Kumari Kandam, mountain ranges that divided it, cities with names and founding kings, and academies of poets that produced literary works now lost. The first Sangam, according to tradition, lasted 4,440 years and was attended by 549 poets. The second Sangam lasted 3,700 years. The third, conducted after the first 2 submersions, is the one whose works partially survived to become the Sangam literature we possess today. The timescales are not dismissible as poetic exaggeration. They are presented as deliberate historical claims within a literary tradition that treated them as factual. What makes Kumari Kandam particularly unsettling is the geological plausibility of a submerged landmass south of India. Bathymetric surveys of the Indian Ocean reveal that the continental shelf south of the Indian subcontinent extends significantly further than the current coastline. During the last glacial maximum, approximately 20,000 years ago, sea levels were roughly 120 meters lower than they are today. Large portions of what are now the Laccadive Sea and the northern Indian Ocean would have been exposed as coastal plains and low-lying terrain. The area known as the Chagos-Laccadive Ridge, running southward from India toward the equator, would have formed a partially exposed spine of land reaching hundreds of kilometers into the sea. Several ancient maps depict landmasses or large islands south of India that have no modern counterpart. Ptolemy's 2nd century geographical writings describe a large island called Taprobane, traditionally identified with Sri Lanka, but the dimensions and positional data in some manuscript traditions place it far larger and further south than Sri Lanka's actual location. Medieval Arab geographers made similar references to southern lands that could not be reconciled with the known islands of the Indian Ocean. The persistence of these accounts across independent cartographic and literary traditions suggests that something was remembered, even if imperfectly. The truly disturbing implication of Kumari Kandam is what it reveals about the duration of human cultural memory. If even fragments of the Tamil tradition preserve genuine recollection of land lost to rising seas 10,000 or more years ago, then human civilizations have been transmitting accurate geographical information across timescales far longer than mainstream history typically accepts. Oral traditions, transferred across hundreds of generations, would have to preserve not just the general memory of flooding, but specific details about terrain, rivers, and settlements. This is either impossible, in which case the Tamil accounts are literary invention that happens to align with real submerged geography, or it is possible, in which case human cultural memory reaches back into the end of the last ice age. Neither option is comfortable. One requires coincidence on an extraordinary scale. The other requires the acceptance that our species has been watching its world drown for far longer than we'd like to admit. Number 4. Terra Australis and the ice-free Antarctica of the Piri Reis map. In 1929, a group of Turkish historians working in the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul discovered a fragment of gazelle skin parchment. It was a map. The surviving portion depicted the western coast of Africa, the eastern coast of South America, and along the bottom edge, the northern coastline of a large southern landmass. The map was signed and dated. It had been compiled in 1513 by Ottoman admiral and cartographer Piri Reis, who noted in his marginalia that he had drawn on approximately 20 source maps, some of them attributed to the era of Alexander the Great. In 1956, a communications officer in the U.S. Navy Hydrographic Office, Captain Arlington Mallory, examined the map and made a claim that would generate one of the most persistent controversies in cartographic history. The coastline at the bottom of the map, he argued, did not depict South America alone. It depicted Antarctica, specifically the coast of Queen Maud Land, and it depicted it without ice. The claim was subsequently examined by Charles Hapgood, a professor of history at Keene State College, who published a detailed analysis in 1966 titled Maps of the Ancient Sea Kings. Hapgood argued that the Piri Reis map, along with several other medieval and early modern Portolan charts, preserved geographical information that could only have been acquired during an era when Antarctica's coastline was at least partially free of ice. The last such period, according to Hapgood's analysis, would have ended no later than approximately 4000 BC, and possibly far earlier. The mainstream consensus is that the last ice-free window for the specific regions shown on the map closed tens of thousands of years before any known civilization capable of marine cartography. What makes the Piri Reis map particularly unsettling is not the map itself, but the chain of sources it cites. Piri Reis did not claim to have surveyed the southern coastline. He explicitly wrote that he had compiled his map from older charts, some of them ancient. The clear implication is that the coastline was drawn from information that predated the Ottoman cartographic tradition by an unknown margin, possibly by thousands of years. The mainstream response has been to argue that the coastline depicted is simply a distorted rendering of South America's Atlantic coast. This interpretation requires assuming that multiple cartographers working in different traditions independently invented coastlines that happen to correspond approximately to Antarctic geography. The persistence of Terra Australis in pre-modern cartography extends well beyond Piri Reis. Medieval European maps routinely depicted a large southern continent, long before any European vessel had sailed far enough south to observe one. The Arance Fine map of 1531 shows a detailed southern continent, including what appear to be river systems and mountain ranges. The Mercator map of 1569 includes a southern landmass of continental proportions. The Philippe Boiche map of 1737 depicts Antarctica as two separate landmasses divided by a waterway, a configuration that bears some resemblance to what modern survey has revealed as the subglacial division between East and West Antarctica. In every case, these maps were drawn before the relevant territory could have been surveyed using any technology then known to exist. The truly disturbing aspect of the Piri Reis map and its companions is what they imply about what has been lost. Piri Reis explicitly cited 20 source maps. Most are unknown. The Library of Alexandria, which is traditionally associated with the compilation of ancient geographical knowledge, burned in multiple stages between the 1st century BC and the 7th century AD. Whatever it contained, whatever charts and geographical texts from older civilizations had accumulated within it, is gone. What survives in the Piri Reis map may be a fragment of a fragment of a fragment, a cartographic inheritance whose full content was destroyed before the modern world began. The coastline at the bottom of a single piece of gazelle skin may preserve the ghost of knowledge that our civilization is no longer capable of acquiring on its own terms. Number 3. Zealandia, the hidden continent beneath New Zealand. In February 2017, a team of 11 geologists, led by Nick Mortimer of GNS Science in New Zealand, published a paper in the journal GSA Today that formally reclassified a region of the southwestern Pacific. For decades, New Zealand had been treated as an island nation. Mortimer's team argued, with supporting data that included continental crustal structure, tectonic coherence, geographic area, and elevation, that New Zealand is not an island nation. It is the exposed 6% of a continent. The remaining 94% lies submerged beneath the southwestern Pacific Ocean. The continent covers approximately 4.9 million square kilometers, making it roughly the size of the Indian subcontinent. They named it Zealandia. The scale of the discovery is almost impossible to process. A continent exists. It has existed for at least 85 million years as a geologically distinct landmass, separated from Antarctica and Australia during the breakup of Gondwana. For most of that time, it was at least partially above sea level. Between 85 million and 23 million years ago, portions of Zealandia sank beneath the Pacific. Driven down by tectonic processes still poorly understood. Today, only the high points, the mountain ranges of New Zealand, New Caledonia, and a scattering of smaller islands remain above the surface. The rest is under 1,000 to 2,000 meters of seawater. It is not a microcontinent. It is not a continental fragment. It is a full continent. And until 2017, it did not officially exist. What makes Zealandia particularly unsettling is how completely it hid in plain sight. The seafloor bathymetry that reveals Zealandia's structure has been available for decades. The continental crust beneath New Zealand has been known to geologists for much longer. What was lacking was the conceptual willingness to call it what it is. Generations of students learned that Earth had 7 continents. The map was wrong. There are 8. And one of them is almost entirely underwater, and has been for most of the period during which mammals, including the early ancestors of modern humans, have existed on the surface of this planet. The implications for cartographic history are not widely discussed, but they exist. A number of Pacific indigenous traditions, particularly among Maori and certain Polynesian cultures, include accounts of larger lands to the south or east that were lost to the sea. These have traditionally been interpreted as mythological or as references to smaller events. The discovery of Zealandia does not prove that the traditions preserve genuine memory of Zealandia's exposed period. Most of Zealandia sank long before any human population existed in the Pacific. But the question of whether any portion of Zealandia remained above water late enough to be observed by human migrants is an open one. Some of the continent's higher regions may have been partially exposed during Ice Age sea level minimums, providing stepping stones for migration, and possibly for settlement, now entirely drowned. The truly disturbing aspect of Zealandia is the reminder it provides about the reliability of the map we think we know. A continent the size of the Indian subcontinent sat submerged beneath a well-traveled ocean for the entire duration of modern scientific geography, and was not formally recognized until 2017. The question of how many other continental scale structures lie beneath the seas, awaiting the specific combination of data and conceptual willingness required to identify them, does not have a comforting answer. The surface geography of Earth is an incomplete record. The real map is the one that includes the drowned continents, and we have not finished drawing it. Number 2. Mu, or Lemuria, the Pacific motherland of occult tradition. In 1864, British zoologist Philip Sclater published a scientific paper in the Quarterly Journal of Science addressing a problem that had troubled naturalists for decades. The lemurs of Madagascar, the bush babies of Africa, and certain primate-adjacent species of India and Southeast Asia shared characteristics that suggested common ancestry. But the oceans between them should have prevented any continuous land connection across the Indian Ocean for tens of millions of years. Sclater proposed a solution. He hypothesized that a now submerged landmass had once connected these regions. He called this hypothetical continent Lemuria. The hypothesis was taken seriously by 19th century science until the development of plate tectonic theory provided a better explanation for the distribution of lemur-related species. By the mid-20th century, Lemuria had been abandoned as a geological concept. But before that abandonment occurred, the idea had already escaped the scientific literature and entered the occult traditions of the late 19th century. Helena Blavatsky, the founder of Theosophy, incorporated Lemuria into her cosmological writings in the 1880s, describing it as the homeland of one of the root races of humanity. James Churchward, a British writer active in the early 20th century, developed a parallel mythology around a similar Pacific continent that he called Mu, claiming it had been the motherland of all human civilization before its destruction in a catastrophic flood. What makes Mu and Lemuria particularly unsettling is not the occult elaboration, which has no scientific standing, but the specific geographical claims that occasionally align with genuine prehistoric realities. Churchward and later writers associated Mu with the Pacific, specifically with the region between Easter Island and the Asian mainland. They pointed to the statues of Easter Island, the megalithic structures of Pohnpei, and the underwater formations off the coast of Yonaguni, Japan, as potential fragments of the lost civilization. Mainstream archaeology rejects the connection. But the underlying fact that Easter Island lies thousands of kilometers from the nearest inhabited land, and that its Polynesian settlers reached it through navigation techniques that remain partially mysterious, creates a cultural gap that the Mu mythology attempts to fill. The Pacific does contain submerged features worth noting in this context. The Ontong Java Plateau, north of the Solomon Islands, is the largest oceanic plateau on Earth, covering approximately 1.9 million square kilometers. It formed approximately 120 million years ago through massive volcanic activity and is currently submerged beneath 2,000 to 3,000 meters of seawater. The Manihiki Plateau, further east, is a similar structure. These are not continents in the geological sense. They are oceanic plateaus of volcanic origin. But they represent substantial submerged features of the Pacific that have influenced regional oceanography and, by extension, may have influenced the geography available to ancient Pacific migrants at various periods. The truly disturbing aspect of Mu and Lemuria is the function the myth has served in the absence of complete historical information. When mainstream history cannot fully account for the cultural and biological distribution of the Pacific, the vacuum attracts speculative geography. Sometimes the speculative geography is wrong. Sometimes it turns out to align with later discoveries. Zealandia was dismissed for decades before being formally recognized. Mauritia was dismissed before being confirmed. The Ontong Java Plateau was unknown before modern bathymetry. The Pacific is not a blank ocean. It is a drowned landscape of submerged plateaus, sunken fragments, and continental scale structures that our species has only recently begun to map. Whether any of that geography ever supported a human civilization that the Mu tradition preserves in distorted form is a question that cannot be answered with current evidence. Number 1. Atlantis, the headline continent, and the ancient maps that refuse to go away. In approximately 360 BC, the Greek philosopher Plato wrote two dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, in which he described a lost civilization. The account is specific. The civilization existed on a large island or continent located beyond the Pillars of Hercules, which is the ancient name for the Strait of Gibraltar. It was larger than Libya and Asia combined, which in Plato's geography meant larger than the known lands of North Africa and the Near East together. It possessed an advanced culture, a powerful military, and an empire that extended across the western Mediterranean. Then, approximately 9,000 years before Plato's time, approximately 11,600 years before the present day, the entire continent was destroyed in a single day and night of earthquakes and floods. It sank beneath the sea and disappeared. Plato attributed the account to the Egyptian priests of Sais, who had told it to the Athenian statesman Solon approximately 2 centuries before Plato's writing. Solon, according to the account, had been told that the Greeks themselves preserved no memory of the event because their civilization had been destroyed and rebuilt multiple times in the intervening period, losing their historical records in each collapse. The Egyptians, the priests claimed, had preserved continuous records, and Atlantis was among the events they had preserved. What makes Atlantis particularly unsettling is not the narrative itself, but the geographical and chronological specificity of Plato's claim. The date he provides, approximately 11,600 years ago, corresponds almost exactly to the end of the last ice age and the period of catastrophic sea level rise that drowned Doggerland, submerged much of Beringia, inundated coastal regions across every continent, and caused the flooding events preserved in flood traditions from dozens of independent cultures. The location he provides, beyond the Strait of Gibraltar, corresponds to the Atlantic Ocean, which contains submerged features including the Azores Plateau, the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, and extensive continental shelves off the coasts of Europe, Africa, and the Americas that were exposed at various points during glacial maximums. The cartographic tradition around Atlantis is persistent and strange. The Piri Reis map, discussed earlier, includes a landmass in the central Atlantic that does not correspond to any known modern island. The Athanasius Kircher map of 1669, based on earlier sources, depicts Atlantis in the central Atlantic with a shape and positioning that some researchers have attempted to correlate with seafloor features of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. Several medieval Portolan charts include islands in the Atlantic that have no modern counterpart. The most famous of these is the island of Brazil, High Brazil, which appeared consistently on maps from approximately 1325 AD onward. Depicted west of Ireland as a circular island bisected by a channel. It was charted and labeled on major European maps for more than 5 centuries, was searched for by multiple expeditions, and was only formally removed from maps in the 19th century after it was conclusively determined not to exist at its charted location. The truly disturbing aspect of Atlantis is not whether the specific Platonic account is literally accurate. The disturbing aspect is the convergence of multiple independent threads. A specific Egyptian priestly tradition preserving an account of catastrophic flooding at the end of the last ice age. A date that corresponds almost exactly to the actual period of catastrophic post-glacial sea level rise. A location that corresponds to an ocean containing multiple submerged features that were partially exposed during the era in question. A sustained cartographic tradition persisting across more than 2 millennia, depicting lost land masses in that ocean. A global pattern of flood traditions from independent cultures, every one of which describes a great drowning in what would translate to roughly the same era. Either all of these threads are coincidences, or something happened. Either Plato invented a detail-rich account whose specifications happen to align with the real timing and geography of post-glacial catastrophe, or some echo of an actual event has survived across 11,600 years of human transmission, arriving in fragments through Egyptian priests, Greek philosophers, medieval cartographers, and the flood traditions of unrelated cultures scattered across every continent. The first option requires extraordinary coincidence. The second option requires the acceptance that human civilization is significantly older or significantly more capable of long-duration memory than the official timeline allows. Neither option is comfortable. Both are on the table. And somewhere beneath the Atlantic, the seafloor continues to preserve whatever it is preserving, waiting for a survey specific enough, a technology powerful enough, or a generation patient enough to look. If you want to see more videos like this, click the video on screen now and make sure to subscribe.